Well, hello everybody. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into part of the Cold War that's called Vietnam. Okay, now Vietnam, of course, is a country, but when you say Vietnam, you most likely hear, at least from an American audience, the Vietnam War, because it was a very, very traumatic and difficult war, as you can perhaps get some sense of by just even looking at this picture. And so we're going to explore, why this war happened, what this war was all about, what fighting and combat was like in it, and really how it changed how Americans view war in general. So we'll be taking a look at the Vietnam War. I would urge you to break this particular presentation up into bite-sized chunks. If you can't handle the entire thing all at once, because it can go long, then take a break and then come back to it later. Okay, but let's take a look. Obviously, this is an artist's rendition of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. You can see it's in Washington D.C. And it shows this particular Vietnam vet, and he's obviously having a moment, and he's thinking about perhaps some of his friends that were left in Vietnam, who died in Vietnam. And the nice thing about this particular wall, the powerful thing about this particular wall as a memorial, is that it has every veteran's name, all the soldiers who died in Vietnam, all the American soldiers who died in Vietnam, their name is listed here. And it's this very polished kind of marble material, which is very reflective. And so it has this ability to really have this emotional effect on people, particularly those who were there, because they get to see their own reflection. They get to look at themselves, but they see their friends' names. Okay, so obviously this is an artist rendition of some of the things that he's thinking about. But he sees maybe his buddies that died while they were in Vietnam, and it's a very troubling and powerful thing. This was a kind of a controversial monument when it was first made. They had to, take a whole bunch of proposals for, what sort of memorial are we going to have. Usually memorials for wars tend to have like soldiers on horses and, statues and things like that. And there was, and there still is, an example of that. But this particular memorial, the people who initially thought that they wouldn't like it tend to actually say, you know what, I do like it, and it is effective, and it's a fitting tribute to see, the cost, of the war, and really has that kind of an emotional pull on it even today. So if you go at some point in your life to Washington D.C., do take a moment to stop and reflect here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial there in D.C. Okay, so let's take a look at the Vietnam War itself. Well, to get some sense of the Vietnam War, you first kind of need to understand where Vietnam is. There's an old adage that this is the wars are America's way of learning geography. Most Americans before the war in Vietnam would have had no idea where Vietnam is. And probably that's true today. You probably would say to most Americans, where's Vietnam? You'd probably get a lot of questioning looks on their face, like, I don't know, somewhere in Asia maybe. But here you can see Vietnam is this part here. It's actually part of at one point, it was part of the French Empire's colonies. And so this is kind of where we're looking at. This is Vietnam, and it's kind of interesting. There's going to be a North and South Vietnam, just like there was a North and South Korea, and how we had a war there with North and South. A similar thing is going to be breaking out here. If you recall, we're looking to contain communism. Okay, so Russia is up here, and we're trying to stop the spread of communism everywhere into Western Europe. Certainly is trying to stop the spread after it got into China and then North Korea. We're going to try and stop it from everywhere. But this is where Vietnam is. They're in Southeast Asia. Okay? Well, go back a little ways. Go back at least into the 1800s. And as I mentioned, it was part of France's empire. Okay? If you recall, there was a lot of empire building we know that we used to be part of the British Empire. As a matter of fact, if you look back here, Britain had a huge empire. Britain had Australia and huge parts of Africa and India, parts of the Middle East. Here's Britain. And France wanted to do the same. Here's France. France wanted to have, parts of Africa and parts of the Middle East and parts of Southeast Asia. But why? Because it kind of gave their nations prestige, and they could say that we have a global empire. And, Britain had Canada, and Britain had, us in the United States for a period of time. Well, France had what they called French Indochina. They didn't even call it Vietnam, okay? And the French had, colonized it, and they decided that they were going to take over this area, and they were going to make it, into their empire. And they were going to teach all the Vietnamese people, here, speak French, and here, take all our culture, and here, become, Catholic, and here, become, all the things that they thought, were good about themselves. They wanted to have the people who were here, the people who got colonized, they wanted them to adopt those same traits. And so France conquered the Vietnamese people and brought in all their culture and brought in the colonial armies, and they brought in all these things to make Vietnam as French as they could possibly make it. It would be a market where the French people could sell French goods, but it'd also be a place where France could get things that they couldn't get in France. If rice was very easy to plant and grow in Vietnam, then they would grow rice in Vietnam, and then they would sell it in France. Or rubber. Rubber was a big thing. They can't, the rubber tree plant, they can't really grow those in France, so they would grow them here in Vietnam, and then they would take that out and bring it to France. Okay, so this is kind of the reasons why countries wanted colonies. Markets where they could sell stuff, and also places where they could get, a lot of times it was crops or minerals or gold or something like that, and then bring that back to their countries. All right, so Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, they're all part of what's called French Indochina. I'm sure a lot of people in Vietnam did not want to be part of the French Empire. Some did, but a lot of them certainly didn't. And by the 20th century, there's going to be people around the world in a whole bunch of countries, especially after World War II, they're saying, we don't want to be part of the British Empire anymore. We don't want to be part of the French Empire anymore. We were taken over by Japan. We don't want to be part of them. We want to be our own countries. So that was a pretty common way of thinking. India saying, we want to be India. We don't want to be, the British India. We don't want to be, part of some African colony of France or Spain or Portugal or Italy. We don't want to be. We want to be our own country. So leave us alone. Let us kind of become our own country. That was a pretty common anti-colonial message that the people were saying. Well, as you can see, in the Cold War, things really got painted just in two colors, red like the communists, or, blue like us, essentially the things that were going to be non-communist. And so Vietnam is going to become another kind of a proxy war. It's going to become a proxy war as part of the Cold War. Okay, let me just back up one moment. After, having had Vietnam for many, many years, during World War II, Japan took it over, kicked the French out. Well, after Japan lost World War II, the French came back, and they said, well, we want to take back our empire. We wanted to take back what was ours and become, rulers once again. But a lot of the times the Vietnamese people, especially in the north, are like, no, we just got rid of the Japanese. We don't want you to come back. We just want to have our own country. So when you see the end of the World War II breaks, Vietnam is going to be divided, okay, just like Korea had been divided. In the north, it's the communist controlled country called North Vietnam, okay, and South Vietnam is, suffice it to say that South Vietnam, if not a democracy, was at least anti-communist. And that was good enough for the United States and any Western allies, because we just did not want, the South Vietnamese to become communist. Why? Well, remember containment. we believed sincerely that if one country were to become communist, okay, knock down this one, then the next one, then the next one, the next one, then the next one, all the way, through to India, and maybe the United States itself, who knows? But these dominoes have to be stopped. And this is called the domino theory. Okay, well, if North Vietnam goes communist, well, then South Vietnam will become communist. That's the second domino to fall. And then Cambodia will become communist, and then Thailand, and then we're into, Malaysia and India eventually. So the whole point of stopping communism was stopping the spread of communism. And equating it to being like dominoes was a metaphor designed to, try and explain to American people why we are there, why we need to be there, why we need to stop this from happening. We stopped North Korea from taking over South Korea. So now naturally the idea was we have to stop North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam. Okay? So that was kind of the big picture, the big Cold War picture. Okay, so we're going to help support the South Vietnamese. They're our proxy. We're going to give them aid. We're going to give them guns. We're going to give them training. We're going to give them all these sorts of things. And the Soviet Union and China are doing the same for North Vietnam. Okay, they're giving them aid. They're giving them guns. They're giving them training. And so any kind of fight, okay, is going to be done through our proxies. The South Vietnamese are the United States proxies. And the North Vietnamese are the communist proxies. Okay? Well, this is not like World War II. World War II, we could bring to bear a lot of our big advantages. We had a whole bunch of advantages in the United States. We could produce lots of tanks and guns and things like that. But when you're fighting in a jungle, you really can't use a lot of the equipment that would have been, very useful fighting Germans or something like that. You can't really do that. It's not very effective. The big problem is there's all this vegetation that covers up everything, and you really can't see, where your enemy is. It's very, very difficult to know where your enemy is because it's easy to hide in the jungle. If you're flying above it, in a helicopter, or if you're flying above it in an airplane, you don't know who you're dropping your bombs on are. You can't see anything. So this is a very difficult war to fight. And on top of that, you can't drive a tank through here. It would get clogged down. It would get stuck. It can't go through a jungle. So there's a lot of things that, Americans just kind of assume that we've got the better tech and we can just use it at all times. Well, no, we can't. Some of the technology that we have, it just doesn't, it doesn't go here. And so you have a different kind of war. Part of the reason is also the environment. It's very wet in Vietnam. There's this whole season where it just rains and rains and it's just mud. So there's a problem with the wet. Okay, there's a problem with the mud. There's a problem with not being able to see because of the jungle canopy. Okay, so it's a really difficult terrain. There's a lot of tunnels, as we're going to see here. They have to send these American soldiers down into tunnels. I mean, that has got to be, for me, I can't imagine a scarier job than saying, all right, we found a tunnel, here you go. Go down there with a flashlight and a pistol and see what you find in these tunnels. And these were extensive tunnels. You can understand, they're not going to have tanks down there. There's not going to be any guys with big guns down there. I mean, you just can't do it. So how do these tunnels look? It's just crazy. If you had a vehicle, you're not going to be able to use it. Okay, look at all these tunnels. They got these elaborate places to. These are the Viet Cong. They have all these supplies that they can keep down in these tunnels. They've got beds. They can sleep down there. They've got booby traps. They can trap things. If you try to come down there, it's like a pit trap. It is really, really hard to even know where your enemy is because you can't see them. And so all of this terrain, is a big advantage a lot of times for the VC, the Viet Cong. It's really hard for American soldiers to operate, not knowing when somebody's going to jump out or, hop out of behind a tree or in the jungle. You just don't know. Okay, it's really, really tough, and they were frightened of always being, falling into these booby traps, spikes. You imagine covering up with these grass. You don't know it's there. I mean, look at this guy. He's going to hide underneath this. You'd have no idea that somebody is going to be where they're going to be. And the traps that they laid were really, really nasty traps, and they would cause, even if they didn't cause somebody to die, they would cause somebody to get really slowed down. And then they'd have to bring them back and patch them up and provide medical aid and things like that. And that was oftentimes is what they wanted to do, just to slow down soldiers. Imagine getting into some of these tunnels like this. So this is not World War II kind of a combat. Okay, the jungle is really, really difficult to operate in. Well, okay, if you have problems with the jungle, get rid of the jungle. That's the idea. There's this chemical agent. It's called Agent Orange. And the idea was it's a herbicide. And you could take airplanes and you could just drop a whole bunch of this spray. Okay, so you see this airplane and it's spraying a whole bunch of this chemical agent. And it'll kill the trees. Okay, and that's the idea. That will kill it so you don't have leaves covering up everything, and it makes it easier for, I guess, airplanes if they're trying to drop bombs or something. They can see what they're trying to drop bombs on. It makes it easier for soldiers who are patrolling through the jungle to see, what they want to see. Okay, that's why they're doing it. What they didn't realize is just how nasty this particular chemical herbicide would be. Anybody who comes in contact with this, it causes really nasty diseases and cancers, mutations. Sadly, just ordinary people in Vietnam who came in contact with any of this, their children that were born with terrible, terrible birth defects. It's like unlike anything you've ever seen in any kind of horror movie. Mutations from Agent Orange is just truly frightening. It's really, really awful. But that was one of the things that they would use to try to, clear out some of that jungle. Another thing that was used in Vietnam was this fire called napalm. It's kind of like, I call it a sticky fire. I mean, you can get covered in napalm. You can jump in the water and still burn underwater. I mean, this is a really nasty, awful, sticky fire. A lot of times you'd see these patrol boats. These were boats in the United States that would go up and down Vietnamese rivers. And, because they were frightened that Vietnamese Viet Cong soldiers might be, hiding in the tree line over there, they would try to burn all that down with some of this stuff called napalm, these flamethrowers. You could drop it out of an airplane in a bomb. You could spray it, like this is one of the spray nozzles that they have. They could just spray it all over the forest and things like that. But one of the things I think that surprises people the most about our war in Vietnam, where we did have the technology, was how many bombs we dropped on Vietnam. Now, none of them were atomic bombs. There were no H bombs, no A bombs, no nukes. Okay, no nukes were dropped in Vietnam. And yet, look at this stat. More tons of bombs are dropped on Vietnam than all the bombs dropped in World War II combined. So we're dropping lots and lots and lots of bombs all over Vietnam. And a lot of times, the pilots, they're getting a radio signal from some soldiers down below telling them, we think there's some VC in this area here. Will you come and fly over and drop some bombs? And they call in airstrikes. But a lot of times they don't know. A lot of times they can't see exactly where they're dropping these bombs. They're not entirely sure how effective they are. They have to take some photographs and go back and look and see if they, hit their target, whatever their target happened to be. But yeah, these bombs are devastating. They bombed some North Vietnamese cities, devastating. But all of the bombs in World War II combined, far, far more Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers die from the United States than in reverse. Okay, this is very, very much the case indicated. You can see here by also just the number of bombs that we're dropping. But what about on the ground? On the ground, where soldiers are fighting, the thing that they're having the most difficult time with is figuring out who their enemy is. Because again, I go back to like World War II, when the United States, for example, is fighting Germany. You know who your enemy is. They're the guys wearing the gray uniforms with a German helmet, and they're wearing, their flag, the Nazi flag on their arm or something like that. We know who we're fighting in World War II. And it was pretty easy to, pick out, the soldiers from civilians and know, okay, we're a World War II soldier. We know who our enemy is. In Vietnam, they don't. These soldiers will go into the jungle and they'll find themselves a village, and they'll see some people who live in the village, and they'll say, we got shot at from this village. Are you a soldier? Well, how do they know? He's not wearing a uniform, and where's your gun? You had a gun. You probably hid your gun. Well, where is it? They don't know. And so this is a really hard thing for soldiers to deal with, just knowing who their enemy is. And emotionally, they don't know. What if I shoot this guy and he was actually our friend? What if these people living in this particular village, what if they were on our side? Well, if you go and torch their village and shoot it up, well, they're not going to be on your side anymore, are they? They're going to be very quickly turning over to the communist side and, be very angry at what you've done. And so these U.S. soldiers are really in a spot. The generals and the politicians tell them to go out and search and destroy and find the VC. Well, when they find people, and these soldiers, 18, 19-year-old kids have to decide this. Is this guy VC? Is he a communist? Or is he just an ordinary person who's a farmer? And putting that kind of decision onto the shoulders of a 19-year-old kid to decide what to do next, oh boy, I don't know. That's tough. How do you live with wondering if you made the right choice, if you knew who you were actually fighting? So this is going to have long-term impact on a lot of these guys, because they don't know, even after the war is gone, even after they've gone home, they don't know if did they do the right thing. Okay, because it's such a hard thing figuring out who is the enemy when they don't wear, a uniform like you're used to seeing in World War II. Be a good time to take a break here if you need to. Okay, so the other thing that this war has come to be known as, Vietnam, also became known as the Living Room War. And why is that? Well, it's because this is going to be the first televised war. We'd had, movie reels and things like that, certainly in World War II, and even go back to World War I, and you can find people who took movies of it. But movies take a long time. You take a bunch of film from an old-fashioned movie camera, and then you got to go back and you got to develop the film, and then you get to decide what gets cut and what gets put into the film, and people kind of edit out some of the bits that they think, ooh, that's too bloody. Well, we don't want to show that in a movie theater, and so they kind of sanitize it for public, consumption. Well, that's not the case. In a lot of cases, the TV shows people what's going on in the field, and they'll have reporters who are in the field with the soldiers, and the cameras will come along, and the cameras will watch what happens. And this goes back and it's shown on TV for the first time. Americans get to sit in their comfy chairs and on their couches, and they get to watch what is going on in Vietnam. Well, the politicians say one thing. The politicians say, oh, we're winning and we're, destroying all these communists and all that kind of stuff. But then when people watch what's happening, they go, that doesn't seem like what I was seeing. What I was seeing is, a bunch of U.S. soldiers were running away from something, or they were hunkered down after the Tet Offensive, and they had to take cover. And what's going on here? Your politicians say one thing, but my eyes say something different. And so for the first time, really, because this is all televised, many Americans began to have some doubts about, the war propaganda that is being said by their own government. Usually people believe their government. When the president would come on and then say something, you just say, "Yep, that happened." But now, and Johnson and Nixon, they're both saying things, and people are going, "Yeah, that doesn't really match up with what I just saw on TV last night." Okay? And so TV has a big effect on how people feel about the war. And how people feel about the war is really important, because if you want popular support, if you want people to keep agreeing that this war is worth fighting, you got to, convince them that we're winning. And this is something that TV causes some people, not everybody, but some people to doubt. And if you don't have that popular support, people begin to say, "Why are we there?" There's this long-term image of, fighting for, the United States, and now they took it and they said, "Well, now I don't want to be there anymore." So this is kind of what an artist shows as play against, popular support for the war. Uncle Sam. Well, there are a couple of different points of view, at least, about the war in Vietnam. One has been characterized as doves. These are birds that are usually associated with peace. And the movement that begins to protest American involvement in Vietnam, those people are oftentimes characterized as doves. Okay? A lot of hippies were doves, certainly, but not all protesters of Vietnam were hippies. Okay? But you can definitely see that there is an anti-war movement. It starts a lot of times, as many protests do, in colleges. And here you see a lot of people, protesting ending the war in Vietnam. A lot of people in colleges, wondering, what the purpose is, particularly the draft. If you volunteered to join the military, that was one thing. If you got drafted, a lot of times people were very, very frightened of what that meant. Some of them did not want to go. Some of them didn't want to go and went anyway, to do their civic duty. But questions are being raised. Why? Why are, at this point, 48,700 American soldiers dead? Okay, and they want to know. Some people are refusing to go. These are a group of looks like blue-collar workers. We won't fight another rich man's wars. Many people find ways to try to get out of Vietnam. Perhaps saying that they have issues with their feet, or finding something to allow themselves to defer their draft while they go to college. In any event, not going to Vietnam would also be controversial and remains so today. So these are the folks that are called the doves. Okay, they don't like the Vietnam War. They think the United States shouldn't be in it. They question the whole reason for it, and they think that it should end now. All right. There is another side. The people who were for the war, they're called the Hawks. Okay, the Hawks. You can see some of the, Uncle Sam and flag waving and our flag, our country, and peace by strength and victory, and support American soldiers, and all these kind of ideas. So these are the folks, and this was probably the most popular point of view at the start of the war. As we'll see, over time, the war becomes less popular, but at the start of the Vietnam War, this was by far the most popular point of view. But if Vietnam was America's longest war up until fairly recently, as things go on and on and on, it begins to get less and less popular, and certainly this point of view grows in popularity over time. But the Hawks and the Doves, okay, and these are the Hawks, definitely have some disagreements. Sometimes they fight it out in the streets. Sometimes they fight it out politically. Sometimes different candidates from different political parties And there's going to be there are going to be Democrats who are hawks and doves, and there's going to be Republicans who are hawks and doves. So it's not, as easy as saying it was, Republicans were this way and Democrats were this way. There was, some overlap. Okay, there was some overlap between those two groups. Generally, you can say that Republicans were hawks, and generally, you can say that Democrats were doves, but there was quite a bit of overlap. Well, once the Vietnam War ended, there was a lot of soldiers that needed to come back home and readjust to society. Some of them couldn't do it. Some of them were really, stuck with what had happened in Vietnam. And those who really had a really difficult time leaving behind some of the memories, the thoughts, the feelings that were going on in Vietnam suffered from a mental illness that's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And you can see here the Vietnam vets, maybe 830,000, okay, even to this day. This was through 2009, I guess. Iraq and Afghanistan got about 306,000, the Gulf War maybe 56,000. So a huge chunk of the soldiers who were veterans in the Vietnam War struggled with some of the things that they saw. It could have been like, the blood and death and nastiness that was going on, or maybe it was just some of the philosophical questions that they had to wrestle with, like, what did I do? But they struggled with a lot of this and still are struggling with this. This is why when I say if you know somebody, a grandparent or what have you, that served in Vietnam, a lot of times for them it's a hard thing to talk about, even now. And maybe they have struggled in their life with this as well, this post-traumatic stress disorder. Even the homeless. A lot of times the homeless people that you see on the streets, a lot of times you see them with a sign, our vet troops. If they're a certain age, they're veterans of the Vietnam War. This guy is a Vietnam vet, 173rd Airborne, 65 to 69. 1 in 4 of the people who are homeless, at least when this was taken, this is in 2012, were veterans. Okay, so you can see most of those veterans were Vietnam veterans. So they may have left the war, but the war didn't leave them. And this is one of those things which continues to affect them and us as a society, even to this day. Knowing why you're there, knowing what you fought for, and believing in it, that's one of the things that these troops are certainly struggling with. And we always want to make sure that we know what we're fighting for, and that it's a cause that we can all be proud of. And when we need to support troops that come back home, we need to support troops, the people. Right here. Right here. Well, okay, you guys, there are some questions that I do want you to answer by looking at these notes and also looking at the videos that you've taken a look at. Those will be the things to watch and answer those questions about Vietnam War.